Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. It's good to see you all here. I'd like to welcome you to our first expanded User Share Excel webinar event. My name is Stephanie Boozer. I'm with CUGC HQ. And first up for us in this afternoon of really awesome content is Kurt Roemer. He is the Chief Security Strategist at Citrix. And I got Kurt to do this for us. I found him at Synergy and he was giving a talk, and I kind of accosted him after his presentation and asked him to come and speak to our user group. So I'm so glad that he agreed to do so and kick off this event. So with that, I will hand things straight over to Kurt to get right into it. And Kurt, I'm sending the screen to you right now.
Sounds good. Thanks, Stephanie, and hello, everyone. I'm Kurt Roemer, Chief Security Strategist with Citrix, and I'm happy to talk today about securing the future of work. As a Chief Security Strategist, I'm typically looking several years out in terms of where security is going to be, how we're going to be leveraging not only technology trends, but also business trends, social trends, geopolitical trends, and try to prepare us for a new state of security and different ways to do things that help to achieve more desired results and outcomes, shall we say. So with that, I've put together a few slides. I look forward to this being a very interactive conversation. So if you have anything that you've got a question about or a point that you'd like to raise, please put that into the chat, and Stephanie will go ahead and present those questions. So to start off, we're looking at what the options are for integrating security into the fabric of the workplace. And by that, we mean making sure that security is always there at the right levels, helping to protect our sensitive information and helping to protect our privacy as well. You know, security and privacy and compliance really go together, and they're a two-way street. It's not just about the security of the organization you're working for. It's also about your personal security and your personal privacy. And we take the traditional three pillars of security, which are confidentiality, integrity, and availability, and we add to those as well these days safety. Because when we're working with the Internet of Things, safety definitely comes into play. Remember that the Internet of Things is basically the bridge for us between the physical and cyber worlds. And because of that, there's quite a bit more we need to think about from a security perspective as we integrate IoT technologies. Also, throughout this presentation, we're going to have a series of questions that you can go back and reflect on and ask yourself and your organization and the people that you work with and support as you're designing security architectures. And these questions really range from operational to inspirational. For example, what metrics, KPIs, key performance indicators, and SLAs, or service level agreements, can we use to measure security? How can trust be measured? How can it be acted upon? How can it be reported on? From a privacy perspective, how can privacy be assured and verified throughout the information lifecycle? And we've got some new privacy initiatives that are coming up, particularly in the European Union with GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulations. If you haven't taken a look into that, it really redefines the price of privacy. And then when you're also asking yourself questions, think about things like, we have autonomous cars. Why don't we have autonomous security? Wouldn't that make sense? Wouldn't that make all of our lives a lot easier? And probably the most important one from my perspective, how do we better focus security on outcomes and the decision points that we need to reflect on if the outcomes are at risk? Security is not just about policy and technology. It really is about outcomes, and that's what we need to be moving towards, and that's what we need to be supporting. So in terms of overall topics of discussion, I'll leave these for you to read, but basically we're going to be talking about the future of work. We're going to be talking about some of the areas of the organization that are getting in the way and maybe not helping us as much as they should in terms of continuing our security mission, how you can integrate IoT and other technologies to help make sure that you're supporting your workforce as you move forward and utilizing IoT as a security benefit, and similarly with cloud and mobile. And then, every vendor out there these days is talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning. And sorry, I'm going to be doing that as well. But from my perspective, artificial intelligence and machine learning really aren't just how to take information from logs and give you a little bit more actionable intelligence on it. That is important, and that is important to IT and to the security teams. But from my perspective, artificial intelligence and machine learning are going to take all of this information that we have on how people are accessing applications, how they're connecting, and what relationships they have with each other, with their apps and their data, and really take this information and apply it so that we can go through and provide some deep insights to the business that they otherwise wouldn't have had. So when you're architecting your solutions and thinking about how to bring in AI and ML, think from a business perspective and get out and talk to your business partners about it. I think you'll find some really cool things that we can do from a security perspective. Okay, when we take a look at the future of work, there's a lot of different situations that people are working in these days. The traditional 9 to 5, sit in the office, butt in the chair type of environment just really doesn't exist for a lot of us anymore. And that's great. Having this flexibility to be able to work from anywhere and be able to just pick up and go and still be productive really enables many of us to balance our work and personal lives more and be able to deliver much more meaning at work, because we can do our best work when we really have the capability. So if you're somebody that your best work is done from 5 to 7 in the morning, you should be able to do that instead of waiting till 9 a.m. to be in the office. And we see people working in a lot of non-traditional environments these days. And be sure that you're factoring in these situations and the unique security and privacy implications that each of them bring to the table, including one of my personal favorites, working on an airplane. So when we talk about the future of work, there are a lot of trends that we need to be thinking about. And this is about how we can work from different locations, how we can work from different devices, how people can utilize cloud technologies. And in many cases, you've got a lot of lines of business that are out there even bypassing the IT organization and engaging what's called shadow IT. So they're getting out, they're buying their own endpoints, they're connecting up to whatever network's available, they're going direct to cloud. It's amazing. All the organizational policies and everything that companies are paying for from a network security perspective and IT personnel just don't apply when organizations completely bypass IT. So we've got to take a look at how people are working and think about how IT can be a lot more relevant, especially as we're embracing a lot of new people into the workforce, particularly millennials. And I'll pause there for a second and see if we have any questions. Stephanie?
Yeah, so I think what you bring up about millennials is a good point. So how, I guess the question would be, how do you think about the future of work with millennials or as opposed to some of us who may have a different mindset about how we work?
Yeah, from a millennial perspective, it's really about the work product and really about engaging and doing very interesting things. And being able to dynamically set up teams, be able to dynamically put people on projects, allowing people to work and collaborate in the way that a lot of millennials are teaching us new ways to engage, really has challenged a lot of the existing IT infrastructure that was set up very rigid, that you go into a desktop or you go into an application and you're stuck in that all day. And with the millennials, there's a lot of different applications that they're using, a lot of different devices, a lot of different services. We need to find a way to allow people to utilize all of these different resources in a very security conscious way and be able to combine them in ways that make sense. So when you think about moving forward, don't just think about publishing desktops or publishing applications by themselves. Think about putting a workspace out there that helps to produce a desired work product and desired security outcomes. Sit back and think about how you can design around how millennials work and revisit your security strategies based on that. I think you'll find some really cool ways that people are engaging these days, and maybe a different way to look at security within your own organization. All right, any other questions, Stephanie?
Right now, everybody is all quiet, so I think we can keep going. Maybe they're afraid to ask.
All right, well, we'll have to fix that. Yeah, definitely as you think about the shifts that are coming, think about digital disruption and how more things in our lives are being made digital, and how our digital identities, our personas, and our digital lives continue to evolve. It's very, very important to look at this from a security perspective, reflecting on both the organizational needs as well as the individual needs.
Hey, Kurt?
Yes.
Sorry, one question did come in that I think is probably going to be relevant to how you define things. Was how do you define millennials?
Millennials are not just a generation, although there definitely is a millennial generation that's out there right now. But millennials are more of a thought process and a way that people engage in acting more as freelancers, as opposed to somebody who's going to go and join a company and plan on being there for 30, 35 years. Millennials are looking more at how they can get value out of their work product and feel good about what they're accomplishing, as opposed to putting in time to be able to get a pension. So it's really interesting. It drives some different behaviors, and some of them are extremely positive from a productivity perspective. But from a security perspective, they're also posting a lot of information out on public sites, asking for help, collaborating with others, and not necessarily understanding the implications of sharing sensitive intellectual property, because they don't see it as that. If somebody's writing a program and they're having a little bit of a challenge with why they're getting certain results or certain error codes, they might post snippets of that program up on a public website asking for some help, and not realize that they might be exposing sensitive business information in doing that. So that's the challenge with millennials, but the benefit is that they're working in new ways that are really helping all of us think differently. All right. From an organizational perspective, we take a look at end users, and the theme of this slide is more, more, more. End users, of course, want more autonomy. They want more choices. They want more flexibility. They want to be able to work from anywhere, from any device. They want to be able to utilize any application, and they're basically empowered. And they can definitely ask for more, and they definitely are. From an IT perspective, what does IT want? Well, they want more control, they want more technology, and they want more policies. And notice that sometimes flies in the face of what end users are looking for, and the two can very much be at odds here. If that's the case in your organization, you're going to want to sit down and reflect on that and figure out how you can move beyond it, because otherwise IT will increasingly be irrelevant, and that's not a good position for any of us. So IT needs to probably revisit what they are really looking for more of. And then from the chief security officer perspective, very, very common for the chief security officer to want more too. They want more people, they want more money, and they want more oversight. And that can also be very interesting. We need to find a way to do more on the security perspective without it always requiring more people, more dollars, and more invasiveness. And that's what we're going to be talking about here. So also organizationally, I was speaking at the Gartner Security and Risk Management Conference in Sydney, Australia a few weeks ago, and I never take pictures of slides at conferences. I took a picture of this one because it really stuck out. If you can't see this real clearly, it says by 2022, in 60% of large enterprises, business units will select their desired level of cost and risk. That's really interesting. I thought this was monumental. This really speaks volumes to what IT needs to be thinking about, and in particularly the security organization, as they move forward. And interested in hearing from the folks on the phone, is this something that you agree with? Is this something that you're planning for? Is this something that shocks you as well and you think we should definitely be reflecting on? What are the thoughts there, Stephanie?
So far, not yet. Hey guys, if you want to put in your thoughts about that, you can just type them in the chat window. Give Kurt your response to that statement. Oh, here it comes.
As we're waiting for that, you know, we also have a Ponemon Institute study that Citrix participated in and helped commission. And organizations are saying that they're at risk because of complexity. They're at risk because they can't control employees' devices and apps. And definitely that a new security framework is needed.
So I do have a couple of thoughts for you. One from Joe says there's a delicate balance of business driving IT and IT driving security. Eric says it all sounds great until the desired level of security and risk allows their system to get hacked.
Yes, good point.
Someone agrees, says currently most departments starting to look at this now. Maybe in large corporations, but it would be interesting to know what definition of big companies is. So there's, and then Hal has said he doesn't think it will take that long. I've already seen the shift heading that way. So lots of good thoughts there.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that. When we take a look at the new IT security framework being needed, we completely agree. And what I'd like to do is spend a little time talking about that framework from our perspective and helping to put together some of the questions and issues as you go out and design your own framework for supporting the unique needs of your organization. First of all, from a Citrix perspective, our security strategies have been pretty consistent. We've been building on those. First of all, whenever you can centralize apps and data, do that. If you can centralize apps and data instead of allowing them to be over distributed to every endpoint and USB key and copied up to every public enterprise file sync and share, you've got a lot more control, especially over sensitive data. When you need to control data, it is for sensitive data. Public data, we shouldn't worry about. We should allow that to be freely copied and utilized anywhere so that people can read reports on an airplane and be productive. But for truly sensitive info, if you can keep that info in the data center, you've got much better control over it. And even for somebody who is working off of a SaaS or web or cloud app, something like Office 365, and they go home, you can control whether they can copy, paste, save, print, or otherwise exfiltrate data by publishing the browser and then making sure that you're providing all access to everything from that point forward from an enterprise perspective. Makes it easier for end users to connect up to all of these applications because they just go to one single source for it. And it makes it a lot easier for IT to make sure that policy applies even if people are using SaaS and cloud apps. So virtualization, not just for legacy apps, it's got a really great place in terms of the cloud as well. Similarly, when you've got sensitive data that has to be mobilized, make sure that that data is protected in an enclave. And these enterprise enclaves can go on mobile devices. They hold the applications, the data, the policy that's unique to the organization. And you can even set this up so that this enclave provides a barrier between company supplied information on a personal mobile phone and the personal side of the phone itself. So in other words, you're helping to make sure that personal devices stay personal, people can maintain their privacy, and they can still utilize enterprise information and carry it with them, especially when they need to have it offline for people who are first responders or otherwise have areas where they have network degradation or unavailability and still need access to critical data. And then from a policy perspective, and particularly from a Citrix perspective, we want to make sure that we've got contextual policies that apply in different situations. So if you're working at home, you're in the office, you're in the airport, you're working on a personally owned device or a company issued device, there are all kinds of different security policies that could apply and should apply based on those individual situations. And it ties back to what I call the 5 W's of access: who, what, when, where, and why. In terms of supporting that, you can engage with policy across the Citrix products, from XenApp to Zen Desktop to NetScaler and Zen Mobile and ShareFile, and be able to have policies that are contextually aware to protect you in any situation. And then also making sure that you're not just reviewing logs, that you're looking for analytics that are giving you more deep insight into what's going on and providing visibility to the organization. We'll get into that in a little more detail on how we can do that. And here's our architecture slide that really shows how, from the left-hand side, a user perspective, you're giving them a unified experience. They can support BYO. They've got identity management, and they can maybe supply a single set of credentials and have single sign-on across internal and external applications. In other words, you're making their life easier by giving them one place to go for their resources and not making them remember 90 different passwords, password policies, and account settings. So from an end user perspective, it makes it much, much simpler. And then from an IT perspective, you've got the control and visibility and can apply policies across all of these different applications. We like to call a lot of that control a software-defined perimeter, so that you're not having hard perimeters that have to constantly be moved and readjusted. You've got a software-defined perimeter that's programmatic, that can change as security needs change, as the threat landscape changes, and as the applications and data sensitivity that you're working with changes. Not going to go through all of this, but take a look at the needs and initiatives that the user community and line of business is working with, and talk to them very specifically about how they're doing that and how they're addressing some of the ransomware and malware attacks, for example, and how they're focusing on data sharing, what their data sharing needs are, and how they collaborate. Those are typically some pretty big areas of loss these days, and something that people need to be aware of. Also, hopefully most everybody on the phone is familiar with the cybersecurity framework that's published by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technologies. If you're not, I'm going to give a little introduction to that and actually walk through each of these areas, the core functions: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. And when you think about these, traditional organizations have looked at these as IT responsibilities. As we go through this, why don't we think about this as a shared set of responsibilities between the line of business and IT, and how we can work together. It'd be kind of interesting to walk into a line of business today and talk to one of the leaders about what's your plans for respond and recover if we have a cybersecurity incident. Most organizations are going to have a response that says that's IT's job. Well, actually, no, it's not. It is a shared responsibility. And that's why I really like what NIST has said about this. These core functions are performed concurrently and consistently. They're performed with an operational culture, and it helps to address the very dynamic nature of cybersecurity risk these days, which is constantly changing. So let's take a look at these one by one, and I'm not going to read through everything on these slides. We'll make sure you have a copy of these later, but there's some great stuff on here for you to go back to the organization and really talk to about each of these areas and how IT is going to engage and IT security is going to engage with the line of business. So we've already talked about centralizing and containing some of the information, and then using Internet of Things to be able to bridge physical and cyber, automating access to facilities and control over facilities to rooms, and even interaction with people as things move on, and autonomous vehicles. Also, as you're publishing your applications, you can provide rich metadata to be able to provide for data classification. Is this sensitive data? How sensitive is this? What roles should have access to this data? What project teams should have access to this data? The entire goal of data classification has been very elusive over the last few decades. And now finally, because we can tag metadata, and we also have artificial intelligence and machine learning that are looking at the relationships as people utilize applications, share data with each other. We get a better understanding of what's normal, what might be abnormal behaviors, and even where we can recommend some optimizations. You can even take a look from an AI and ML perspective and say, here's a line of business owner that every single quarter goes through and says they're going to accept a set of risks that seem to be pretty extreme, but they're doing it just so that they can get their job done. And you can go back and take a look at the risks that they're accepting as part of their business and help them to understand where they're putting the rest of the organization at risk and help provide better training or better tools for that individual so that they don't just have to accept the risk, that they have other options for mitigating it. So AI and ML are going to take a look at our relationships with our apps and data and how we're sharing and utilizing those, and really get down not just to the technical perspective, but also take a look at how individuals and teams are working with this information. And then also from an identification perspective, it's not just your own organization's data anymore. There's a lot being said about your organization out on social media and out in other vehicles on the internet. It's helpful to know those, know sentiment, and be able to track even net promoter scores so that you understand how your security organization is working and how effective they are. And also definitely from an identity perspective, make sure that you're identifying the value of these assets to the organization more than monetarily so that we can protect them in the right ways. From a protection perspective, you want to make sure that you're protecting data appropriately. And so if you've got totally public data that you'd post out on a billboard or ship to anybody, is that something that you should be spending an insane amount of money in terms of security? Probably not. But if you've got some of the most sensitive intellectual property in the organization, trade secrets, M&A deals you're working on, that's probably information that you want to protect definitely at a higher level. Do we do that today? In most organizations today, you've got a generic set of security applied at the endpoint, patches, updates, standard versions, antivirus, maybe configuring a firewall or IDS/IPS client. You've got standard protections at the network from firewalling, IDS/IPS, encryption. You've got standard protections for various applications and for identities. But these apply no matter what your role is within the company, no matter what you're working on. And it's things that unfortunately are way too generic. We're spending way too much today to protect public information, and we're not spending enough to protect some of the real crown jewels. When we take a look at the cybersecurity framework and how we can come up with this new security architecture, we've really got to think that through in some new ways. And highlighted on the slide are some ways that you can go ahead and be able to provide for protection that is contextual, that considers how people are sharing data and copying it down to mobile, that you've got the ability to go through and publish browsers. And even if you're publishing something like email, somebody gets a link and they want to click on it, or they accidentally click on it before they think about it, that link should open up in a separate one-time use published browser that's not connected to anything, not connected to your registry, not connected to your endpoint, not connected to your network. It's just basically in its own bubble. So somebody clicks on a phishing or ransomware attack, sure, the attack comes in, it opens that one-time use browser, but it goes no further and it hasn't infected the organization. A little different than the situation we have today where every single browser is in scope and directly connected to everything. So think about how we can do that. And then another real key point here from a protection perspective is there's a lot of protection that also involves workflows. And you're protecting processes, you're also protecting things like administrative practices. So maybe if you've got somebody who's out there making changes out in the cloud and instantiating new services, or maybe moving a lot of your cloud-based resources from one provider to another, today a single administrator can act on their own and do that. Does that really make sense? Is that something that you want to allow, or do you want to be able to put workflows in place that have boundary conditions, that if people are doing things that are going to potentially incur too much risk to the organization for a single administrator, that a workflow engages that gets approval from their manager or maybe even their VP, so that you're signing off on the appropriate risk. And the person who has responsibility at a business level for assuming that risk or mitigating that risk or insuring against it, et cetera, is making that decision, as opposed to an IT resource that is otherwise just moving around aspects of the technology. So totally a different way of looking at protection. And most organizations do think quite a bit about this, and it helps us really differentiate between securing against the impact of a single actor versus somebody who might be in a situation of collusion. And that's something we increasingly have to think about these days, unfortunately. Another area that we want to take a look at is detection. And you're detecting not only just acute events, but also chronic attacks that are happening over time, and taking a look for people who are trying to get access to data, actively shipping data outside of the organization, trying to destroy reputations, trying to get through to administrative and privileged accounts so that they can take over increasing amounts of the organization. And remember that it's not just about people stealing data. It might be tampering with the data, modifying it, degrading access to it, and even changing the workflows so that they manipulate it for what the attacker is looking for. We've got to have ways to be able to detect this, but more importantly, we've got to have ways to be able to take a look at this in a new and innovative way. Trying to find this in a log right now is getting to be increasingly difficult. And when you design your new detection, make sure that you don't just have logging, but you've got some visualization that you can walk through, and maybe a 3D model where you can take a look from an application perspective, or from a network perspective, or from a team perspective, and kind of walk through it and see how the relationships work and how people are interacting with each other. You might even want a 4D model that adds in a time element so that you can see how things are changing throughout the day, week, month, hour, whatever, and have those new views into security. One other point that I wanted to highlight on here is we've got a lot of agents out there from an endpoint perspective, from an end user perspective. These can all basically act as beacons to help provide reputation scoring for risk and for threats and for vulnerabilities and others, so that people can work together and be able to identify issues that would impact the security or privacy of the organization and really help the security team. So instead of users constantly being blamed as the problem for security, I'm saying utilize users to crowdsource security and really advance it. Another key point on here is don't take a look at any organization or any application just by itself. Definitely look across the virtual supply chain. Open source modules that you're utilizing, external services like DNSSEC or NTP, Network Time Protocol, or others that are security critical, and who you're interacting with, who you're getting data from. Take a look at the data provenance associated with that, and make sure that you've got visibility to detect issues across all of those. From the ability to respond, once again, this is something that should be planned according to and executed according to a plan. And this is not just IT and the technology. This involves the business and increasingly communications team to address the reputational nature of a cybersecurity event and how you would respond to that. So. And this is also something that needs to be prioritized, particularly if you're engaging in business resumption and disaster recovery. There are some high value assets that probably need to be brought up faster than others, and these may be very dependent on just that day's business climate. So you need to have somebody who's very well in tune with the news and what's going on with the organization so that they can help to provide for the response plan and finally tune that so it meets exactly what's going on today. Notice that this is quite a bit different than those of us who have been in IT for several decades have been used to. And it's something that we really need to reflect on. But we've got some additional resources in terms of artificial intelligence and machine learning that can go through and take a look at how we designed our practices for protecting this information and detecting incidents, and help us to affect our response, as well as recommend changes to our policies moving forward. A lot of organizations right now, as you look at the issues that have happened throughout the year, from WannaCry and NotPetya to the Apache Struts vulnerability and others, many organizations are going back and saying, hey, we've got to revisit our patching strategy, because before we didn't want to patch anything because we'd be incurring downtime to have to patch and then reboot the server, and the business couldn't accept the downtime. Well, as we've seen from those particular attacks, by not patching, organizations had much more downtime, and in many cases, hundreds of millions of dollars of material impact to the business because of an outdated IT policy that was not reflected upon and did not meet the business needs anymore. So once again, include your business in your response plans. Similarly, with recover. Rollback and recovery is something that IT's been used to for years, and many organizations might feel that they have the ability to roll back and recover. They might have been hit by ransomware and they took a look at it and said, hey, we've got a backup, or we can reach back into our data management solution and be able to pull back out a copy that wasn't encrypted, and we're good to go, right? Well, what they're neglecting to look at in more detail is that when you've been hit by ransomware, that's a successful hack. That's something that's compromised your particular system. It might have compromised your laptop or desktop. It might have compromised servers and application servers and database servers. When those devices and servers have been compromised, it may not just be the simple ransomware attack. We've seen several instances where there was a secondary infection and organizations had compromises at the operating system level, or even in some instances down to the firmware level. When you look at that, your root of trust has been completely shaken, and anything that's a substantial trust factor, including certificates, need to be completely reissued. Go back and ask your business after these attacks this year, if you did have successful compromise externally, did you reissue your certificates and other trust factors? If you haven't, that's an action item. Get on that right away. And we also need to learn from this so that we're more resilient, but also help with machine learning so that we know what the new normal looks like. And from an artificial intelligence perspective, know what the intent was so that we're recovering not just from the technical issue, but also from the intent of the attack and learning from that. Okay, with that, I want to see if there's any questions that have come up in terms of the framework, any commentary on that. Otherwise, I'm going to leave you with a few key questions to ask the organization. So, Stephanie, any questions from the audience?
Yeah, there have been a few. We've had a couple talking about the common theme here: public Wi-Fi when employees are traveling, hotels and airplanes. Excuse me, how to handle that and tighten that up. Couple about that, and then we've had a couple about how to minimize security systems running on different machines. And then, goodness, we've got biometrics in here. People asking about, we have a lot. So if any of that is something that you feel like you want to tackle right now.
Yeah, definitely. So from a public Wi-Fi perspective, there have been several compromises that have been available that would allow an attacker to go through and set up rogue Wi-Fi access points. There have even been Bluetooth-based attacks that have been patched against over the last few months by some of the major providers. There was a foundational issue in Bluetooth. These are technologies that every user is familiar with and reliant on right now, and we have to make sure that we've got mitigations to help protect against it, that we're patching as soon as we know that there's an issue. But we're also giving people an indication of when their device might not be as safe as it otherwise would. And particularly with public Wi-Fi, it's very helpful to go through and configure the devices and help people to understand that just hopping on a generic public Wi-Fi, they are putting their device, their information, their reputation at risk. And from an enterprise perspective, we can go through and mitigate that somewhat by requiring VPNs and even requiring things like mutual authentication. So you're cutting down on the ability for somebody to set up a rogue website because you're requiring certificate-based access from the platform for somebody to go ahead and join a network. I've seen some organizations do that. That requires a pretty robust certificate management framework. Public Wi-Fi is still been definitely a problem, and it's something to talk to your endpoint security vendors about and your network security vendors about to see what options they continue to have as we move forward. And we'll continue to see updates in terms of Apple iOS and Google Android and others so that it makes it much, much easier for all of us to use public Wi-Fi securely. In terms of minimizing the security footprint of the device, there are a lot of options out there today for doing that. You've got thin and zero clients, you've got Chromebooks and Chromeboxes, the Windows S machines. Really have to think these days about whether taking a traditional laptop and having that traditional enterprise laptop just be a standard response to somebody needing a device, and would they be better served with a thinner zero client or a managed Chromebook that just boots right into their virtualization environment and gives them virtualized access to their apps and data. Really easy to set that up these days, and it really cuts down on the security management needs of the device because you don't have all of those other services that are constantly running on it that can be causing problems. And when you're publishing browsers, you can even get down to the situation where you've got JavaScript or Flash or Silverlight or something else you need from those perspectives only turned on for the applications that absolutely need it. You're further domain restricting those applications. You're locking down the certificate chain on those applications, and you're whitelisting and blacklisting what they can interact with. From that perspective, if you make browsing very application specific, you're protecting the application, you're protecting the endpoint more, and particularly for those individuals that are administrators, either within your organization or out in the cloud, you want to make sure that you're publishing those administrative consoles and locking them down very specifically. Citrix has got some good guidance out on that, and you can go out and search for our security around published browsers and get some other ideas on how you can further be able to minimize the scope of the endpoint and provide even stronger access. And then from a biometric perspective and just authentication and identity sources in general, most organizations are moving towards MFA or multi-factor authentication. And from a multi-factor authentication perspective, you can utilize user IDs, passwords, PINs, smart cards, tokens, SMS-based response, biometrics, and you can be able to tie those in from a Citrix perspective into however you're utilizing the application. So maybe when you log in the morning, it's okay for you to supply your user ID and your two-factor token. If you haven't left your office, maybe your IoT device notices that even if you're walking up and around, and all you have to do is put in a simple PIN to get access back to your device, or put your thumbprint down for it. If you're going out and engaging in administration, or you're out approving a, let's say, $10,000 or more transaction, it might require your smart card and another authentication source. And this can all be built into policy so that as people cross various thresholds, their authentication is successively stronger so that security makes sense. And When people are just getting the public data, they should have to supply very minimal credentials. And when they are getting access to increasingly sensitive data, make the credentials even stronger. So thanks, yeah, great questions. Okay, I'll leave you with a few. And here's some questions that I'd like to ask the organization so that we better understand how to design for the future of work. Number one, what's your cloud endpoint strategy? If you haven't thought about this, this is a very foundational question these days. Many people are going direct to cloud for their needs. And if you haven't thought about how you're updating the cloud endpoint strategy, including the security criticality of browsers these days, it's worth going back and asking this and putting together a strategy that reflects not only enterprise managed endpoints and BYO, but how you can handle this when people are primarily not on your enterprise networks. Secondly, how do you make sure that your most sensitive data stays within defined teams? So if you've got a project team that's working on something super secret, a new product, an M&A deal, something that you really don't want to have leave that team, and whether it's internal people, external people, a combination of both, how do you make sure that all work product that's produced by this team is only readable by this team? And we can do that today through publishing the applications, through helping to provide for containerization on the mobile side, and even with data management and share file information rights management, or IRM. Documents are encrypted, tied to team members, and even if somebody gets hacked or they accidentally email a document to the wrong person, that unintended third party is not going to be able to read the document because they're not authorized to. It's kind of a new way of looking at things, and it's not just about hackers, it's also about people making honest mistakes. Also, I kind of hinted at this one earlier, there's a lot of different work situations that all of us are in these days, and it's not just different devices, it's the whole 5 W's of access: who, what, when, where, and why. And understanding devices, user types, different ways that they're working, different locations they're working from, and the regional policies and privacy policies associated with all of those, and automating this and utilizing AI and ML so that you're understanding normal behavior as well as intent, you're coming up with a much stronger set of security policies that are automated for the users and help us all to do the right things. And then also, from an IoT perspective, where can you utilize IoT to be that bridge between your cyber and physical worlds and help to give greater security? But also, the flip side of this is IoT is going to bring in a lot of potential safety issues as well. By being autonomous and by really tying all of us together from an automobile perspective, from a medical device perspective, and just generally using IoT around the office, we've got to really factor in safety so that we've got strong assurance that IoT is helping security and not degrading it. And then lastly, my favorite question, and one that was hinted to earlier in that Gartner slide, how can we make sure that we're engaging the business more and helping them be more responsible for primary data security? Because these line of business owners know the data, they know the applications, they know the relationships better than the IT department does today. But how can IT help to make sure that all the information that we have from Access and all the new insights from machine learning and artificial intelligence, looking at normal behaviors as well as intent, can help to advance the business and give business owners a new way of looking at risk mitigation and the costs associated with that, so that they're making the right decisions and affecting the right security outcomes. I'll leave you with a few key takeaways and want to say thank you very much. Hopefully you enjoyed this session, had some good thought-provoking comments out of it, and look forward to following up as people have additional questions. Thanks, and back to you, Stephanie.
Thanks, Kurt. That was a great presentation. You definitely gave us a lot to think about, and I do have some questions that I will get to you after today's webinar is all done. We get our recording link sent out we'll have that ready for you. So without further ado, in another break, we have Jason Samuel coming up. He's going to talk about native OTP with NetScaler. So very excited to hear from him. So like I said, we'll take a short break. It is 12:51. We'll be back at 1 o'clock. And just stay logged in for the rest of the afternoon. We have a lot of great content for you coming up.